Margaret Lancaster's hand, a landscape of wrinkles and age spots, trembled as she reached for the pendant. The diamond, a mere glint in the chandelier's glow, seemed to mock the turmoil churning within her. Where did you get this? The question, rasped from a throat constricted by years of unshed tears, was barely audible above the hushed murmur of Dominique's. Jasmine, the young waitress, her lithe frame poised with a tray laden with champagne flutes and caviar dreams, froze. The weight of the tray shifted precariously as she stared, bewildered, at the woman before her. Nothing in her training, no amount of experience in navigating the treacherous waters of Manhattan's elite, had prepared her for this. In this opulent arena, where fortunes were made and broken over power lunches, a simple, almost childlike necklace, purchased for a mere $23, was about to detonate a secret that had haunted Margaret Lancaster, one of America's wealthiest women, for 27 long years. Margaret Lancaster was not a woman given to emotional outbursts. At 72, the CEO of Lancaster Industries, a cosmetics empire valued at $4 billion, was a titan forged in the fires of calculated risk and ruthless efficiency. Her reputation preceded her, an ice queen whose gaze could freeze seasoned executives in their tracks. Her silver hair, perfectly coiffed and unwavering, her impeccably tailored designer suit, the discreet sparkle of 3-carat diamond earrings, all spoke of old money, unassailable power, and absolute control. She had buried a husband, decimated countless competitors, and never, not once, allowed anyone to witness a flicker of vulnerability. Until now, the waitress, Jasmine, her name tag a stark contrast to the surrounding luxury, stood paralyzed as this formidable woman fixated on the delicate silver chain adorning her neck. The pendant itself was unremarkable. A small, heart-shaped locket, tarnished with age, bearing a faint, almost illegible engraving on the back. It was Jasmine's talisman, worn every day for as long as she could remember. It was the sole relic of a past shrouded in mystery, her only connection to a life before the sterile walls of foster homes and the impersonal routines of group facilities. "Ma'am, I really need to take your order," Jasmine managed, her voice betraying a tremor she fought to suppress. 6 months she had worked at Dominique's, enduring the demanding clientele and relentless pressure, each hard-earned penny painstakingly saved for the promise of nursing school. This job was everything, the escape route she desperately needed. She couldn't afford to lose it, not because some eccentric socialite had taken a sudden, inexplicable interest in her cheap necklace. But Margaret wasn't listening. Her gaze remained locked on the locket, her face paling beneath a mask of expertly applied makeup. A ripple of awareness spread through the restaurant. Heads turned. Whispers intensified. Margaret Lancaster was an icon, a permanent fixture in Manhattan society. Everyone knew her, recognized her. And right now, she looked like she had just seen a ghost materialize before her eyes. "Please," Margaret pleaded, her voice cracking, raw with a pain that transcended her carefully constructed facade. "Please, tell me where you got that necklace." Jasmine shifted uncomfortably, the weight of the tray digging into her palm. Her manager, Robert, a man whose every movement exuded an almost militaristic precision, was already advancing towards them, his expression a carefully calibrated blend of concern and disapproval. Robert ran Dominique's with an iron fist, and he had made it abundantly clear during Jasmine's hiring that the wealthy patrons were never to be disturbed, never to be questioned. They were to be catered to with silent efficiency, obsequious charm, and unwavering smiles. "Is everything all right, Mrs. Lancaster?" Robert inquired smoothly, inserting himself between the billionaire and his bewildered waitress, his voice dripping with practiced deference. "I sincerely apologize if there has been any inconvenience. I need to speak with her," Margaret stated, her voice regaining a sliver of its customary authority, utterly ignoring Robert's presence. "Alone, please." The restaurant fell silent. The clatter of silverware ceased. Conversations evaporated mid-sentence. Margaret Lancaster, a woman renowned throughout New York for her unshakable composure and impeccable dignity, was weeping. Genuine tears, glistening and unrestrained, carved paths through her meticulously applied foundation, leaving streaks of vulnerability in their wake. Jasmine's heart hammered against her ribs. She had no comprehension of what was unfolding. The necklace had been with her since she was discovered as an infant, abandoned in a grimy hospital bathroom in Newark. It was the only tangible clue to her origins, the only item her unknown parent or parents had deemed worthy of leaving with her. For 27 years, it had hung around her neck, a constant, if unwelcome, reminder that someone, somewhere, had chosen to abandon her. "Mrs. Lancaster, perhaps we should move this conversation to my office," Robert suggested, his tone still professional, but laced with a barely concealed urgency. The last thing he needed was a spectacle. Several diners were already surreptitiously recording the scene on their smartphones. Margaret rose abruptly, her chair scraping against the polished marble floor with a jarring screech. Reaching into her Hermes purse, she extracted a thick wad of $100 bills, tossing them onto the table without bothering to count. "Keep the change," she snapped at Robert, her eyes never leaving Jasmine's face. Then, turning directly to the waitress, she softened her voice, a hint of desperation creeping in. "Please, I'm begging you. 5 minutes of your time. That's all I ask." Jasmine glanced imploringly at her manager. Robert's jaw was clenched tight, but he offered a curt nod, barely perceptible. 5 minutes in the back office. It was a calculated risk, a damage control maneuver. The walk through the restaurant felt like an eternity. Every eye followed them, dissecting their every movement. Jasmine could feel the weight of their scrutiny, the silent judgment. She was just a waitress, an insignificant cog in the machine of Manhattan society. Margaret Lancaster was royalty. Whatever this was about, it couldn't possibly bode well for her. The office was small and claustrophobic, dominated by a cluttered desk piled high with invoices, reservation books, and half-empty coffee cups. Margaret closed the door behind them, the click echoing in the confined space, and turned to face Jasmine, her hands trembling visibly. "That necklace," Margaret began, her voice thick with suppressed emotion. "I gave it to my daughter 27 years ago." The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Jasmine felt the room tilt precariously. I don't understand," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Margaret reached into her purse again, this time retrieving her phone. With shaking fingers, she navigated through her photos, her face illuminated by the screen's glow, until she found the image she was searching for. She held the phone out towards Jasmine. The photo depicted a young woman, perhaps in her early 20s, with long, dark hair and sparkling eyes that radiated warmth and joy. She was laughing at something off camera, her hand resting protectively on a very pregnant belly, and around her neck, nestled against the curve of her throat, hung a necklace identical to the one Jasmine wore. "Her name was Caroline," Margaret said softly, her voice laced with a profound sadness. "My daughter, my only child." Jasmine stared at the photo, her mind struggling to reconcile the image with the surreal situation unfolding before her. The woman did look vaguely familiar, a whisper of recognition flickering in her memory. Or perhaps she was simply projecting, seeing what she desperately wanted to see. What happened to her? Margaret's face crumpled, the lines around her eyes deepening with sorrow. She died in childbirth 27 years ago at a hospital in Newark. There were complications, terrible complications. The baby. She paused, her breath hitching in her chest, struggling to regain her composure. The baby survived, but Caroline didn't make it. She swallowed hard, forcing herself to continue. "I was traveling in Europe when it happened. By the time I got back to New York, they told me the baby had been adopted. The agency said it was a private adoption already finalized. I tried everything, hired investigators, lawyers, but the trail went cold. It was as if she had simply vanished. The room seemed to shrink, the air growing thin and oppressive. Suddenly, Jasmine couldn't breathe. "You're saying—" "I'm saying that necklace belonged to my daughter," Margaret interrupted, her voice gaining strength, a steely edge returning to her tone. "And the only person who should have it now is her child." My grandchild. Jasmine's legs buckled beneath her. She sank into the chair behind her, her mind reeling. It wasn't possible. Things like this didn't happen in real life. She was nobody, just another discarded child, failed by a system that chewed people up and spat them out, bouncing from one indifferent foster home to another until she aged out at 18, completely alone in the world. I was never adopted, Jasmine said finally, the words emerging in a choked whisper. I grew up in foster care. They found me in a hospital bathroom. Someone had left me there with just that necklace and a blanket. Margaret's expression shifted abruptly from hopeful anticipation to profound horror. A bathroom? You were found in a bathroom? At New York General? Yes, Jasmine confirmed, her voice flat. 27 years ago, March 15th. Margaret pressed a trembling hand to her mouth, her eyes wide with disbelief. That's the hospital where Caroline died. March 15th was the day she gave birth. The pieces were falling into place, clicking into alignment with a chilling finality. But the picture they formed was too grotesque to contemplate. Jasmine had spent her entire life grappling with the crushing weight of abandonment, desperately trying to understand why she had been discarded like unwanted refuse. She had conjured up elaborate stories in her head, crafting scenarios where her mother had been forced into an impossible decision, driven by circumstances beyond her control. But this was something else entirely. Someone took you, Margaret whispered, the realization dawning in her eyes, her voice filled with a mixture of anguish and fury. Someone at that hospital took you and left you in that bathroom. They stole you from me. Jasmine felt tears streaming down her own face, hot and unrestrained. The injustice of it all was overwhelming. Now, why would someone do that? Because you were worth millions, Margaret said bitterly, her voice laced with venom. As my sole heir, you would inherit everything. She explained, her voice trembling with barely suppressed rage. Caroline wasn't married. The father was never in the picture. That meant you were my only grandchild, my only living family. Someone must have thought they could profit from making you disappear. By removing you, they thought they could benefit from your absence. The enormity of it crashed over Jasmine like a tidal wave, threatening to drown her in its wake. She had grown up with nothing, shuffled between homes where nobody truly cared, where she was just another number, another check from the state. She had worn hand-me-down clothes and eaten donated food. She had worked tirelessly, juggling 3 minimum-wage jobs to scrape together enough money for community college. And all that time, she had a grandmother, a family, a vast fortune that should have been hers. We need proof, Jasmine said, forcing herself to think rationally, clinging to the last vestiges of disbelief. We can't just assume all of this based on a necklace. Margaret nodded vigorously, her eyes burning with a fierce determination. A DNA test. We can do it right now. I have a lab on retainer. They can rush the results. But even if it's true, Jasmine continued, her voice cracking with emotion, how do we find out who did this? It's been 27 years. The trail has gone cold. Margaret's expression hardened, the grief in her eyes transforming into something else, something cold, implacable, and utterly resolute. We find them, she said simply, her voice a low, dangerous purr, and we make them pay. What neither woman knew yet, what remained hidden just beyond their immediate perception, was that the person responsible for orchestrating this cruel deception was far closer than they could possibly imagine. Robert, the meticulously groomed manager who had been discreetly listening at the door, felt a bead of icy sweat trickle down his spine. 27 years ago, he had been a young, desperate nurse at Newark General, burdened by crippling gambling debts and consumed by a gnawing sense of hopelessness. A nurse who had been approached by a shadowy figure with a proposition that seemed, at the time, like a desperate lifeline. $50,000 to make a baby disappear. He had convinced himself it would be all right. The baby would be found, placed in a loving home. He would pay off his debts, swear off gambling forever, and start anew. But things hadn't gone according to plan. The baby had been left unattended in that grimy bathroom for hours before she was discovered, her cries echoing unanswered in the sterile silence. By then, he had already fled New Jersey, severing all ties, reinventing himself in New York, desperately trying to bury the memory of what he had done. And now, that baby was serving tables in his restaurant, a constant, living reminder of his transgression. And her grandmother, one of the most powerful women in America, was on the verge of unraveling everything. Robert's hands trembled as he furtively pulled out his phone, his mind racing. He needed to call someone, to seek help, to find a way out of this rapidly escalating nightmare. But who could possibly help him now? The woman he had been working for, the mastermind who had orchestrated the entire scheme, was dead. Had been dead for 15 years, silenced by a fatal car accident. And she had taken all her secrets to the grave. Except she hadn't. Because locked away in a safe deposit box in a Manhattan bank, meticulously preserved, was a letter. A letter his contact had insisted he keep as insurance, a fail-safe mechanism. A letter that detailed every aspect of the conspiracy, signed and notarized, a damning testament to their guilt. At the time, he had naively believed it protected him, a shield against future betrayal. Now, he realized with chilling clarity, it was his death sentence. Inside the office, Margaret was already issuing commands, her voice sharp and decisive. Within an hour, a private DNA testing service had discreetly arrived at the restaurant, their arrival masked by the comings and goings of delivery trucks and catering vans. Within 3 hours, they had preliminary results, whispered confirmations that sent a shockwave through the Lancaster empire. Within 6 hours, it was official. Jasmine Torres was, in fact, Jasmine Lancaster, the missing heir, the stolen baby, the granddaughter who had been presumed lost forever. The news broke like a thunderclap, reverberating through the city's social and financial circles. By morning, every major news outlet was running the story, the headlines screaming from every newsstand and flashing across every screen. Billionaire's missing heir found working as waitress. DNA test confirms restaurant worker is Lancaster fortune heiress. 27 years later, the mystery of the stolen baby solved. But Margaret wasn't interested in the media circus, the breathless speculation, the endless parade of reporters clamoring for a sound bite. She was interested in justice. She assembled a team of the best investigators money could buy, ruthless professionals who left no stone unturned. She demanded that the hospital turn over every record from 27 years ago, no matter how obscure or seemingly irrelevant. She subpoenaed bank records, employment files, security footage that should have been destroyed years ago, but which miraculously still existed in some forgotten archive, gathering dust in a dimly lit storage room. And slowly, painstakingly, methodically, the truth began to emerge piece by agonizing piece. It took 3 weeks to connect all the dots, to trace the intricate web of deceit back to its source. The nurse who had been on duty that night, the $50,000 deposit into an account that hadn't been touched in years, the crippling gambling debts, the mysterious woman who had orchestrated the entire scheme, whose identity remained shrouded behind layers of shell companies and deceased lawyers. Robert tried to run, his carefully constructed facade crumbling under the weight of his guilt and fear. He made it as far as the airport, frantically attempting to book a one-way flight to anywhere at all where he could disappear. But Margaret's security team, efficient and discreet, intercepted him before he could even reach the gate. No violence, no theatrics, just a firm hand on his elbow, a quiet, persuasive conversation, a waiting car that whisked him away to a destination from which there was no escape. The woman sat across from him in the back of the limousine, her face a mask of controlled rage, her eyes burning with a cold, unwavering intensity. "I want names," Margaret said quietly, her voice barely a whisper, yet laced with an undeniable menace. "Everyone involved, every person who knew, every person who helped, every person who stayed silent." Robert broke. The dam of years of carefully constructed lies and repressed guilt finally shattered, unleashing a torrent of confessions. He told her everything, sparing no detail, desperate for a glimmer of forgiveness, even though he knew it was impossible. He told her about the woman who had approached him, the puppet master who had pulled the strings from the shadows. Victoria Ashford, who had been Margaret's trusted business partner at the time, her right hand, her confidant. He told her how Victoria had been systematically embezzling funds from the company, siphoning off millions of dollars, and how she had needed Margaret distracted, emotionally incapacitated, to prevent her from discovering the truth. He told her how Victoria had hoped that making the baby disappear would utterly destroy Margaret, leaving her vulnerable and shattered, paving the way for Victoria to seize control of Lancaster Industries. It had almost worked. Margaret had spent years drowning in grief, barely able to function, her spirit crushed by the devastating loss of her daughter and granddaughter. The company had suffered, teetering on the brink of collapse. Stock prices had plummeted. Victoria had come within inches of launching a successful hostile takeover. But Margaret had survived. She had clawed her way back from the abyss, rebuilding her life and her empire with a steely resolve born of unimaginable pain. And Victoria had died in a car accident 15 years ago, taking her secrets with her, or so everyone had believed. Except now those secrets were spilling out, one by one, dragged into the light. And with them came irrefutable evidence of other crimes. Embezzlement, fraud, conspiracy. Victoria might be dead, but she had accomplices, loyal minions who had carried out her orders, knowing full well the depravity of their actions. People who were still alive. People who had profited handsomely from stolen money and a stolen child. Margaret went after them all, with the relentless fury of a woman scorned, armed with the full force of her wealth and power. She didn't just want financial restitution, the recovery of the stolen millions. She wanted criminal prosecution. She wanted prison sentences. She wanted every single person who had played even the smallest role in stealing her grandchild to face the consequences of their actions. The district attorney initially resisted, hesitant to pursue a case that was so old, so complex, so fraught with potential pitfalls. The crimes were decades old. Key witnesses were dead. Evidence was circumstantial and fragmentary. But Margaret Lancaster didn't accept no for an answer. She used every ounce of her considerable wealth and influence, applying relentless pressure from every conceivable angle. She hired the most skilled and aggressive lawyers in the country. She generated a firestorm of media coverage, turning public opinion firmly in her favor. She made it politically impossible for the DA to ignore the case. The trial lasted 6 grueling months, a spectacle that captivated the nation. Robert testified against his former accomplices in exchange for a reduced sentence, his conscience finally catching up with him after years of denial. He received 15 years in prison, a pale imitation of justice for the lifetime of pain he had inflicted. The accountant who had meticulously helped Victoria hide the stolen money received 12 years, his reputation and his career irrevocably destroyed. The lawyer who had falsified the adoption records, manipulating the legal system to conceal the truth, was disbarred and sentenced to 10 years. 3 other individuals were convicted of conspiracy and fraud, their lives shattered by their complicity in Victoria's scheme. The hospital, finally held accountable for its negligence, paid a settlement of $20 million, a paltry sum compared to the immeasurable damage it had caused. And every person who had known something, who had suspected the truth but had chosen to remain silent, faced professional consequences that effectively destroyed their careers, their reputations tarnished beyond repair. But the legal victories, satisfying as they were, couldn't erase 27 years of stolen time, the years that Jasmine had been deprived of a loving family, of a secure and stable childhood. They couldn't give her back the memories she should have had, the experiences she had missed. They couldn't undo the trauma of foster care, the constant feeling of being an outsider, the gnawing loneliness, the persistent sense that she didn't truly belong anywhere. Margaret knew this, understood the limitations of justice. So she focused on what she could control, the future. She brought Jasmine into her home, into her family, into her life, embracing her with a love that transcended decades of separation. Not as a replacement for Caroline, but as her own unique and precious person. She paid for Jasmine to finish her nursing degree at Columbia University, ensuring that she had the opportunity to pursue her dreams. She introduced her to the company, not with pressure to take over the reins, but with genuine curiosity about what Jasmine wanted for herself, what path she envisioned for her own life. And Jasmine, for the first time in her life, had choices, real choices, unburdened by the constraints of poverty and the limitations of the foster care system. She could pursue her passion for nursing. She could become involved in the family business. She could travel the world, experiencing the wonders she had only read about in books. She could do anything. She chose to start a foundation, a legacy that would honor her mother's memory and transform the lives of countless children. The Carolina Lancaster Foundation, named after the mother she had never known, but whose spirit lived on within her, had a simple but ambitious mission: to reform the broken foster care system, to ensure that no child fell through the cracks the way Jasmine had, to provide resources, support, and oversight that would protect vulnerable children and give them the opportunity to thrive. Margaret seeded the foundation with an initial endowment of $50 million, a testament to her unwavering commitment. Within a year, they had successfully placed over 300 children in permanent, loving homes. Within 2 years, they had lobbied successfully for landmark legislation that tightened hospital security protocols and created more effective tracking systems for newborns, preventing future abductions. 6 months after the trial ended, Jasmine stood at a podium in front of a packed auditorium, her voice resonating with strength and conviction. She wore a beautifully tailored business suit that Margaret had helped her select, a symbol of her newfound confidence and her position in the world. And around her neck, she still wore that simple silver necklace, a constant reminder of her past, her present, and her future. "My name is Jasmine Lancaster," she began, her voice steady and clear. 27 years ago, I was stolen from my family and left to die in a hospital bathroom. The audience listened in rapt silence, captivated by her story, moved by her resilience. "I survived through luck," she continued, "and through the tireless dedication of social workers who refused to let me become just another statistic. But I shouldn't have had to survive. I should have been protected. I should have been cherished. I should have been raised in the loving arms of my family." She outlined the foundation's plans, detailing the new initiatives, the partnerships with state agencies, the comprehensive training programs for hospital staff, the nationwide hotline for reporting suspected child trafficking or abandonment. "We can't change the past," Jasmine said, her voice filled with passion. "But we can shape the future. We can make sure that no other child experiences what I did. No other grandmother spends decades searching for a grandchild who was stolen. No other family is destroyed by greed and cruelty." The applause was thunderous, a wave of appreciation and support that washed over her. But Jasmine wasn't doing this for applause, for recognition, for accolades. She was doing it because she understood something profound, something that her grandmother had taught her through her own actions. That power meant nothing if you didn't use it to help others, to uplift the vulnerable, to fight for justice. Margaret watched from the front row, her eyes brimming with tears. But these were different tears than the ones she had shed in the restaurant. Not tears of grief or rage, but tears of profound pride, tears of joy, tears of hope. Her granddaughter, the baby she had thought lost forever, had not only survived, but had thrived, transforming her own personal tragedy into a force for good in the world. And together they were changing the world, one child, one family, one law at a time. The media coverage of the foundation was extensive, transforming the narrative from tabloid sensationalism to substantive reporting. News outlets that had initially focused on the salacious details of the stolen baby story now wrote thoughtful, in-depth pieces about foster care reform, child protection, and the systemic failures that had allowed Jasmine's abduction to occur. Politicians took notice, recognizing the political capital to be gained by aligning themselves with the Lancasters and their cause. Donations poured in, flooding the foundation's coffers. Other wealthy families, inspired by what the Lancasters were doing, started their own philanthropic initiatives, focusing on issues ranging from child poverty to educational inequality. But the most satisfying moments, the ones that truly touched their hearts, were the quiet ones, away from the cameras and the crowds. Like when Margaret and Jasmine visited a foster care facility and saw the faces of the children light up with hope and excitement. like when they received handwritten letters from families who had been reunited because of the Foundation's tireless efforts. Their lives transformed by the Lancasters' generosity, like when they sat together in Margaret's penthouse, looking through old photos of Caroline, and Jasmine finally learned about the mother she had never known, piecing together the fragments of her lost history. "She would be so proud of you," Margaret said one evening, her voice thick with emotion, her hand resting gently on Jasmine's. "Caroline always wanted to help people. She was studying to be a doctor when she got pregnant. She planned to continue her studies after you were born. She had so many plans, so many dreams." Jasmine squeezed her grandmother's hand, her heart overflowing with a mix of sadness and gratitude. "Tell me more about her." And Margaret did. She shared stories about Caroline's childhood, her stubborn determination, her infectious laugh, her terrible cooking, her unwavering compassion. She showed Jasmine home videos, old letters, school projects, childhood drawings. She made Caroline real, not just a tragic figure from the past, but a vibrant, three-dimensional person, full of life and love. "I wasted so many years being angry," Margaret confessed, her voice laced with regret. "After Caroline died and you disappeared, I became hard, cold. I built walls around myself, brick by brick, because I couldn't handle any more loss, any more pain." She paused, her eyes searching Jasmine's. "But those walls also kept out joy, connection, love. They isolated me from the world, from the very things that make life worth living." "You're making up for it now," Jasmine said gently, her voice filled with understanding. "We both are." Margaret smiled, a genuine, heartfelt smile that reached her eyes and softened the lines around her mouth. "Yes," she said softly, "we both are." The necklace that had started everything, the simple silver heart that had triggered a chain of events that had transformed their lives, now hung in a place of honor in the Foundation's headquarters, carefully preserved in a glass case alongside a framed photo of Caroline. Underneath was a plaque that read, "In memory of Caroline Lancaster, and in celebration of every child who survives against impossible odds, may we never forget their worth." Jasmine had a replica made, an exact copy of the original, which she wore every day, a constant reminder of where she came from, the hardships she had overcome, and the purpose that now guided her life. Robert, serving his sentence in a minimum security facility, heard about the Foundation through a news report on the prison television. He wrote a letter to Jasmine, a rambling, self-serving missive filled with apologies and self-justifications, attempting to minimize his role in the crime and portray himself as a victim of circumstance. She never responded. Some things couldn't be forgiven. Some actions had consequences that resonated for a lifetime. He would have to live with the weight of his guilt, the knowledge of what he had done. She would live with what had been done to her, but she wouldn't let his choices define her, control her, or diminish her spirit. The other convicted conspirators faced their own reckonings, each in their own way. The accountant lost his license and all his assets, his professional reputation destroyed. The lawyer was disbarred, his career in ruins. They would spend their remaining years as cautionary tales, examples of what happens when greed overpowers ethics, when ambition trumps morality. But Jasmine didn't dwell on them, didn't waste her energy on resentment or revenge. She focused instead on the children she could help, the families she could reunite, the systems she could change. Her nursing degree, when she finally completed it, included a specialization in pediatric care. She divided her time between working at a children's hospital, tending to sick and vulnerable children, and running the Foundation, overseeing its operations and spearheading new initiatives. Margaret often joked that Jasmine had more energy than she did, despite being half a century younger. "You got your work ethic from me?" Margaret would say proudly, a twinkle in her eye. "But your compassion, your empathy, your unwavering commitment to helping others. That's all Caroline." Lancaster Industries continued to flourish under Margaret's astute leadership, but she gradually began transitioning responsibilities to a trusted management team, grooming the next generation of leaders to carry on her legacy. She wanted time. Time with Jasmine. Time to make up for the decades they had lost. Time to create new memories. Time to simply be a grandmother, without the pressures and demands of running a multi-billion-dollar corporation. They took trips together, exploring the world, forging new bonds. Paris, where Caroline had been conceived, a city filled with romance and history. Tokyo, where Margaret had been when Caroline died, a place of stark contrasts and ancient traditions. All the places Margaret had traveled alone in her grief, she now visited with Jasmine, filling them with laughter, love, and a shared sense of purpose. And in every city, they sought out opportunities for the foundation to expand its reach, forming new partnerships with local organizations, developing innovative programs, and identifying new ways to protect vulnerable children around the globe. The story of the billionaire and the waitress, the grandmother and the granddaughter, became something larger than just a personal reunion, a heartwarming tale of lost and found. It became a movement, inspiring others to action, galvanizing communities, and sparking meaningful change. Foster care reform became a priority issue in state legislatures across the country. Hospital protocols were strengthened, and accountability was increased. Adoption processes were scrutinized and improved, ensuring greater transparency and protection for both children and adoptive families. Background checks became more rigorous, weeding out potential abusers and safeguarding the well-being of vulnerable children. And it all started because of a $23 necklace and a grandmother who refused to give up, who never lost hope, who believed in the power of love to overcome even the most insurmountable obstacles. 3 years after that fateful day in the restaurant, Jasmine stood once again at a podium, in front of a captivated audience. But this time, she was introducing her grandmother, Margaret Lancaster, who was receiving a prestigious humanitarian award for her tireless work with the Carolina Lancaster Foundation. "She is the strongest person I know," Jasmine said, her voice thick with emotion, her eyes shining with admiration. "She lost her daughter. She lost years with her grandchild. She could have let that destroy her, consume her, leave her bitter and broken." She paused, taking a deep breath. Instead, she channeled her grief into something beautiful, something powerful, something that will outlive both of us and help generations to come. "She has shown me the true meaning of resilience, the true meaning of compassion, the true meaning of love." Margaret took the stage to thunderous applause, her presence commanding, her spirit radiant. She looked out at the audience, then back at Jasmine, her eyes filled with love and gratitude. "I've learned something important," Margaret said into the microphone, her voice clear and strong, resonating with sincerity. "Wealth means nothing if you're alone. Power means nothing if you don't use it for good." She paused, her gaze sweeping across the room, connecting with each and every person in the audience. "And family? Family is everything." Her voice cracked with emotion, but she quickly regained her composure. "I would give every penny I have, every asset, every business deal, every accomplishment, just to have those 27 years back with my granddaughter. But since I can't have that, I'll spend whatever time I have left making sure that no other family suffers what we did, that no other child is stolen from their loved ones, that no other grandmother has to endure the pain of a lifetime searching for a lost grandchild." The speech was short but powerful, a testament to the transformative power of love and the enduring strength of the human spirit. And when it ended, Margaret walked directly to Jasmine and pulled her into a long, heartfelt hug, a gesture that spoke volumes, conveying a depth of emotion that transcended words. The photographers captured that moment, immortalizing it in countless images that were splashed across newspapers and websites around the world. The billionaire and the former waitress, the grandmother and the granddaughter, two women who had been torn apart by greed and reunited by chance, their lives forever intertwined. But it wasn't really chance, was it? It was fate, destiny, divine intervention, whatever you wanted to call it. It was that necklace, that small, insignificant piece of silver that Caroline had worn, that she had somehow managed to place around her baby's neck in those final, fleeting moments before everything went dark. That necklace had traveled through 27 years of foster homes and group facilities, enduring hardships and uncertainties, defying the odds. It had survived being pawned or lost or stolen, its delicate chain miraculously unbroken. It had hung around Jasmine's neck like a beacon, waiting for the right moment, waiting for Margaret to walk into a restaurant on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon, waiting to bring a family back together, to heal old wounds, and to create a legacy of love and justice that would endure for generations to come. Share this story if you believe that justice can prevail even against impossible odds. Hit that like button if you believe in the power of never giving up, of fighting for what's right, of using your privilege to protect the vulnerable. Subscribe for more stories that prove that truth and love are stronger than greed and cruelty. Your story could be next. Your moment of recognition could be just around the corner. Never underestimate the power of a grandmother's love or the importance of a simple necklace that carries the weight of generations. Justice may take time. It may require fighting against systems designed to hide the truth. It may demand sacrifice and persistence and unwavering faith. But in the end, truth always finds a way. And love never forgets.